They thought they'd won. I watched the confirmation email glow on my laptop screen like a small, cruel star. Payment processed. Account closed. My hands went cold. The room blurred, then sharpened into the hum of the air conditioner and the ticking of the old wall clock. I'd been scammed out of the escrow money for my brother's surgery. $47,000, everything we'd scraped and borrowed. One message from an impersonator posing as the hospital's billing office had asked me to transfer to a secure private account. I had done it. The attorney I trusted to hold the funds had vanished. My bank's hold failed. The scammer wrote with a casual kind of cruelty, "Sorry for your loss." I didn't lose only cash. I lost control, dignity, and a promise to my brother that I could keep him safe. The first thing that rose was a hot, bitter tremor under my ribs, anger stitched with helplessness. I slammed the laptop shut. I imagined the scammer popping a champagne cork, already tasting triumph. That image made me sick. I thought of calling the police, but the clerk had told me fraud cases took months. I paced. My phone vibrated. My brother's breathing monitor had alarming beeps. A nurse's voice asked if I'd arrived. I grabbed my keys and ran, the city lights blurring past. I promised myself then I would not be a victim whose story ended in a pitying file. If the scammer thought they'd won, they hadn't met Nora Prescott. The hospital lobby smelled like bleach and lavender. I moved through a crowd that felt distant, as if I were underwater. My brother, Mateo, lay under fluorescent light, bandages across his ribs, eyes flicking in slow worry. He managed a weak smile when he saw me but asked only money. My throat tightened. I sat and explained every detail like a needle. How the email looked authentic, how the sender knew the hospital clerk's name, how I'd clicked the link thinking it was safe. Mateo squeezed my hand. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. I nodded, though I did not believe it yet. Back home that night, I called everyone who might help. The bank, the hospital, the attorney's office, lines of bureaucracy swallowing my words. Each person used slow, clinical phrases. "We're sorry. We'll investigate." Possible fraud. Their care was sterile, designed to mollify rather than fix. I read forums, emails, threads of people with similar horror stories, and a pattern emerged. Phony escrow accounts, temporary phone numbers, friendly voices with practice scripts. They vanished fast. I lay awake plotting stupid ideas, confrontations, doxing, public shaming. Nothing felt legal or safe. At 3 a.m, I opened my laptop again, not to weep but to dig. I pulled the scammer's email headers, traced IP addresses clumsily, and cross-referenced names. Something small stuck out, an inconsistency in the attorney's badge number. It was my first real lead. I copied it into a file labeled, simply, Begin. The city had a way of swallowing quiet people. I felt invisible in the streams of faces, yet the file I held felt like a secret detonator. I spent the morning like someone learning a new language, searching public records, parsing state bar registries, tracking the attorney badge through municipal filings. Nothing matched. The badge number belonged to a real firm, but the contact details were off by the width of a coffee shop. Whoever had set this up had mild competence and lots of chutzpah. At noon, I went back to the hospital's billing office. A woman named Claire, young, practical, looked at my notes and frowned. "We never use private accounts for escrow," she said. "We use our nonprofit fund, that's it." Her face was kind when she added, "We'll flag this as fraud. Send whatever you can to our patient relief program for now." I felt a small relief, like a stitch closing. But the money was already gone. That afternoon, I got reckless. I messaged the scammer's email with an obvious bait. "You'll regret this." I knew that sounded juvenile, but anger makes you foolish. I also started calling numbers that came from the header traces. Most were dead. One answered, a voice too smooth, asking if I wanted their legal services for a discounted fee. I played it cool, probing for details. He named a city 2 states away, and then, in passing, called the attorney Roberto. I filed the name, chewing it over. Each small fact was a breadcrumb. I followed them because what else was there? Surrender. I found an old blog buried in search results, posted by a woman in Minnesota who complained about a similar scam 3 months earlier. She included screenshots, the same attorney letterhead, the same phrasing about secure private account. Her comments swarmed with others who'd been burned. The blog linked to a Reddit thread I'd missed where folks pieced together patterns, shell companies, prepaid phones, murky payment platforms. The internet connected victims, in a way official channels didn't. I messaged the blogger, who replied within minutes. "You're not alone. We formed a private group. Want in?" I didn't hesitate. In the group, a dozen people traded their wounds like tools, bank names, timelines, screenshots. We compiled a dossier on patterns. A moderator named Maple suggested hiring a private investigator. The cost was steep, but the combined pot from a few of us could cover a consult. I felt a tiny pulse of hope. We planned a Zoom call the next night. Before hanging up, Maple posted a link to a federal anti-fraud database and an instruction: always preserve headers and timestamps. I copied their mantra into a new document: never delete. That night, the Zoom felt like a war room. Faces flashed: teachers, a retired electrician, a grad student, united by the same hollow ache. The PI, a woman named Lila, explained how scammers exploited emotional urgency and used shell payment rails to launder money through microtransfers. She warned us to expect pushback if we escalated. "They're smart and they're ruthless," she said. A chill slid down my spine, but my resolve hardened. Mateo's surgery depended on it. I told the room simply. We found them. Lila's plan was methodical and comforting. Map the flow of funds, subpoena payment records, and create public pressure. She recommended staging a controlled confrontation with an address tied to the scam's merchant, just to gauge whether anyone was real. We pooled what we could. The group was scrappy, but our determination made up for lack of funds. I donated what little emergency savings I had left and watched as others did the same. For the first time since the emails, I felt less alone. We obtained a partial payment trail the PI could follow, microtransfers to accounts in an online payment processor that accepted wireless cash deposits. The trail zigzagged through a handful of accounts, then into a digital wallet clustered under short-lived business names. Lila predicted the pattern: funnel, consolidate, cash out. We also dug deeper into the attorney's badge number and found a paper trail registered to a dissolved firm from 2 states over. Someone had cloned identity markers and weaponized them. On a humid Friday, Lila proposed I attend a small auction house in the nearby town tied to one of the shell companies. She felt the merchant's payments might result in an actual physical pickup somewhere. I drove, heart thumping, dread and hope tangling. The auction's address matched a nondescript warehouse. Through a window, I glimpsed boxes, some marked with generic shipping labels. My phone buzzed, a new message from Maple. We traced a withdrawal sequence to a downtown ATM this morning. The hunt was narrowing. I braced to step inside. Inside the warehouse, I kept to the shadows. The auctioneer's voice rolled like cheap velvet, and bidders raised paddles in a ritual older than internet scams. Near the back, a man arranged boxes and barked on a phone. He was young, wiry, and nervous, flipping between screens. I took a breath and recorded a snippet, palms damp. It felt intrusive, but surveillance can be a weapon. Before I left, a clerk sidled up to me, curious about my interest. I feigned hobbyist curiosity and asked about recent lots. He mentioned a legal clearance lot that had come in from a private liquidation service. Back in my car, I sent a tip to Lila. She moved fast, calling the PI network to query the liquidation company. The name came back hollow, no real track record, a single phone number registered days ago to a prepaid account. My chest tasted of iron. These people had thought carefully to be slippery. That night, my brother's nurse called with better news. An alternate donor had stepped in to cover an immediate expense, buying us a few more days. Relief and guilt warred inside me. Relief because the surgery could proceed, guilt because the scam was breathing even as we moved. I slept briefly, dreams of pursuers in shadowy tunnels. At dawn, Maple messaged. We found flagged accounts tied to a courier company. They pick up small packages for shell firms. The net tightened. We were close enough to cut a thread. We followed the courier lead like hounds. The company's website claimed nationwide service with flashy testimonials. Behind the site, though, were red flags: no business license filings, generic stock photos, an email that bounced when I tried to verify a contact. Lila recommended a sting. send a harmless package to one of the courier's listed pickup addresses, and watch who came. We wrapped a cheap toy in a note that read, "Package for legal clearance, ACCT 4448. Then we set up a perimeter camera near the pickup location. 2 days later, footage showed a delivery van, nondescript and white, pulling up. A young driver hopped out, glanced around, and scanned the package with a handheld device. He tossed it into the van and drove off. The license plate was obscured, but the camera caught a sticker with a registration number. We sent the clip to a volunteer who worked in DMV records. Within hours, the owner's name popped up and matched no real business registrant. Another hollow identity. I felt closer and farther at the same time. We were assembling a jigsaw with too many missing pieces. Still, the small victories mattered. Lila used the footage to pressure the payment processor for more data, and they squealed, "This is under review." That phrasing felt like a stall. I called my bank and pressured them to freeze any outgoing wires associated with the scam. They moved slowly, but a temporary hold appeared on a linked account. We paused one thread. At night, Mateo's surgery wound healed in slow increments. He texted me a photo of his hand with the hospital's teddy bear. I cried quietly in the bathroom. Ugly, grateful, angry. The fight had cost me sleep and savings, but it also had given me purpose beyond fear. We were playing for more than money now. Social media amplified our pressure. Maple and others shared red flags across platforms, and a local reporter picked up the thread. The article quoted Lila, our PI, and included screenshots of the fake attorney letters and the courier footage. Then something unexpected happened. A commenter named TruthSeeker23 posted a defense for the scammer, accusing victims of negligence. Their tone was smug, and their IP traced to a public library terminal. I bristled. Someone was trolling to discredit us. Then a twist. TruthSeeker23 posted a single line. "You're barking at the wrong dog. Check the payment rails to Silvertide Holdings." No proof, no explanation. It reads like a misdirection. I followed the lead involuntarily. The Silvertide name surfaced as one of the shell businesses in our spreadsheet, one we'd assumed was a dead lead. But under pressure, Lila reprocessed our data and found a subtle pattern. Silvertide had recently received a micropayment from an account used in another scam months ago. The web rewired itself. We decided to stake out a small office building linked to Silvertide. It was the sort of place with cheap mailboxes and a glass door that never locked. That day, I felt jittery and odd, the thrill of discovery mixing with dread. An envelope slipped through the slot. A return address with a company name I recognized, the dissolved firm whose badge number had been cloned months ago. They were weaving identities together in a new braid. Someone was watching us, or worse, trying to shape the trail. The chess game deepened. Pressure makes people sloppy. 2 days after the office stakeout, a courier mistakenly delivered a paperwork packet to a real law firm across the street. The attorneys there were sharp-eyed and compassionate. They called Lila and offered to forward anything useful. Inside the packet was a typed letter listing a corporate transfer and a digital signature with an email domain we had not seen before. It was a small human error that revealed a new channel. With this new node, Lila petitioned a federal anti-fraud hotline directly. The caseworker listened for 20 minutes, then asked questions that made me feel both seen and exposed. "You have documented evidence," she said. "We produced the courier footage, the packet, the micropayment patterns." The caseworker replied, "This might be larger than local fraud rings. If the trail hits cross-state consolidation, we can escalate." My pulse pounded. Escalation could mean real enforcement. Night brought a sudden escalation of my own. An unknown number called me, a voice like papercrisp. He said casually, "We recommend you stop contacting legal counsel." The call dropped. My gut flipped. The threat was subtle and terrifying because it admitted their awareness. I forwarded the message to Lila and the caseworker. They advised caution but urged us to push. The fight felt alive now in 2 directions, exposing the scam and surviving their attention. That weekend, Mateo improved enough to joke about hospital food. I let the laughter slide over me like balm. At the same time, I slept with one eye open, aware that powerful people could be patient predators. The next morning, Lila told me the federal office had assigned an investigator. "They'll want to talk," she said. My hands shook. I realized we had crossed into territory where the stakes were no longer personal but national. An investigator from the federal office introduced himself as Agent Powell over a secure call. He had a calm, blunt manner. "We've reviewed your packet," he said. "You and your group have been thorough. We'll open a formal investigation if you can maintain the chain of custody on all evidence." His words were validation in a contract. We had to be precise, no leaks, no vigilantism that could backfire. I felt oddly proud, like our ragtag resistance had earned legitimacy. Agent Powell scheduled an in-person interview. He wanted me to detail every contact, to show metadata, to swear a statement. The thought of testifying terrified me, but I agreed. On the day, he walked into the conference room with a folder and a portable recorder. He asked about Mateo, about my emails, about the morning I'd clicked that link. I told him everything, including the improvised bait and the auction visit. He took notes with a focused look I found comforting. "We'll take over certain lines of inquiry," he said. "But we need you to keep doing what you're doing. Don't publicize anything new without contacting us first." His instruction was sensible and maddening. Our online group had momentum. Stopping felt like swearing off oxygen. I promised. We pivoted. Lila prepared a consolidated dossier for federal lawyers while Maple coordinated quieter surveillance. At night, I felt a strange tug between relief and the fear that invisible hands had noticed our movements. Still, I slept better knowing a federal agent had stepped into the ring. The investigation shifted the tenor of our hunt. With federal backing, banks and payment processors became more cooperative. I watched emails go from polite stonewalling to curt compliance. Agent Powell requested one risky thing: to allow a controlled reveal of partial data to a journalist to pressure the shell companies into cracking communication channels. We agreed, cautious. The article ran with careful redactions, and within 48 hours, an anonymous tipster sent another lead to our inbox, a VPN provider with ties to the scam server cluster. On the surface, nothing seemed different. At home, I made coffee, helped Mateo with rehab exercises, and attended St. Vincent support group meetings. But my life was bifurcated: daytime domesticity, nighttime detective. Each week held a small victory, a frozen account, a recovered microtransfer, but the scam seemed vast and hydra-headed. Some nights, I dreamt of the scammer's face, neat and untroubled, and woke with a chill. One morning, Agent Powell called with a curt update. "We've got movement on a money mule in a neighboring state. We're coordinating with the local PD for surveillance." My heart stamped. A money mule, someone collecting cash at an ATM, meant a tangible human link. We were finally moving from digital ghosts to bodies. I arranged to be on standby if Agent Powell needed witness testimony. This felt like a turning point. They made an arrest on a muggy Wednesday. Agent Powell texted a single line. "We got one." I drove to the federal satellite office and sat in a blue plastic chair, watching a bank of monitors showing footage of an ATM. A man in a hoodie approached, scanned a code, and walked away with a small bag. Policemen moved in. The moment felt both exhilarating and bleak. The arrested mule was young, scared, and pleading ignorance, claiming someone posted an ad for part-time courier work. His phone contained spreadsheets linking payouts to accounts we recognized. It was messy evidence of a larger machine. In interrogation, the mule spilled that he'd been paid through cash pickups and that his handler used the name Roberto when arranging drops. He said the handler was careful, meeting only in public spaces and using disposable phones. The mule's testimony gave us a sketch, not a face, a handler operating across state lines, patient and distant. Agent Powell cautioned about trusting the mule's memory. People in fear will fold details to fit stories. But the mule had given us a phone number, a call time pattern. It was more than we'd had. That night, Lila pored over the mule's phone data and found a repeated short code ping to a cloud service. The code matched a subdomain referencing a payment rail used by several shell companies. The machine's architecture was exposed, not wholly, but enough to let investigators pull one thread. I fell asleep thinking of how tiny knots unravel when pulled just right. The next morning, Agent Powell called to say they'd obtained a subpoena for server logs. I felt the world tilt. Subpoenas turned our speculation into enforceable commands. Server logs revealed routing paths, buried, Messy sequences of handshake protocols and IP hops, some routed through overseas proxies. But hidden in the noise was a domestic foothold, a person logging in repeatedly from a cafe near the city's port. The timestamps matched our courier pickups. We triangulated the cafe and placed quiet surveillance. I found myself returning to a role I'd never wanted, an informant in my own life, watching faces and noting patterns. On a cool Friday afternoon, I sat near a window of the cafe with a book open but eyes peeled. A woman came in, plain hair, sensible jacket. She ordered black coffee, sat, and worked on a laptop. Her posture was careful. After an hour, she left with a paper bag. Agent Powell's team followed. My stomach tightened. They trailed her to a storage facility near the docks. It felt cinematic, the kind of scene I'd only seen in movies. The storage unit held several parcels and a laptop. In the unit's trash were printed shipping labels with names we recognized. When the storage unit was secured and investigators began cataloging evidence, I felt a surge of triumph and fear. Their items contained detailed scheduling for pickups and transfers, and a list of contacts that included that cloned attorney badge number. The woman's fingerprints were on a notebook listing payment destinations. We had a person in the frame. This was the nearest we'd come to a face. The woman arrested at the storage facility, her name was Elise, sat in an interrogation room with a calm that unhinged me. She denied involvement at first, claiming she managed logistics for small importers. Her alibi was thin, and her phone records contradicted her story. Under pressure, she admitted to coordinating pickups, but insisted she didn't know the ultimate purpose. She named a man she called R. He handled money flow, she said, and never met face-to-face. Elise's testimony matched the mule's account. Handlers, coded names, compartmentalized roles. The scam's architecture depended on keeping people small, ignorant, and replaceable. We discovered that Elise had a bank account tied to a local LLC, one of the shell companies on our list. She claimed she'd been paid to process paperwork for an importer and had forwarded funds to a clearing account. The clearing account led to a private wallet conversion service that liquidated into cash through a network of ATMs. The chain was ugly and efficient. Agent Powell briefed us they would pursue charges for fraud and money laundering. Simultaneously, the feds would track the routing to see if we could locate and prosecute the masterminds who designed the scheme. Lila told me to expect long hearings, legal obstacles, and a fight through labyrinthine corporate law. I realized the battle was moving from frantic chasing to courtroom patience. It was less cinematic but no less crucial. Media interest spiked with the arrests. Local news ran segments showing footage of seized documents and interviews with victims. Some callers praised our resolve, others attacked our methods. The scammer, apparently stirred, escalated their harassment. Anonymous calls warning me to back off, a fake social account created to smear my name. The cowardice of anonymity coiled like a snake. It stung, but also revealed their fear. Exposure hurt. Agent Powell warned me about retaliation and suggested we secure restraining orders against any overt threats. He also arranged for a small witness protection detail to keep my address confidential in court filings. The practicalities of legal safety felt surreal. Filing motions, sealing records, getting state troopers to monitor subpoenas. The law insulated me in ways my anger couldn't. Court proceedings began. Elise and the mule were arraigned, and the judge set a date for a preliminary hearing. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I met other victims face-to-face for the first time. Their eyes were fierce with the same blend of hurt and determination. We exchanged quiet nods. The sense of shared purpose buoyed me. For the first time since the email that stole our money, I felt the trajectory turn from reactive to proactive. The system was clunky, but it moved. As court dates loomed, Lila and Agent Powell coordinated with foreign partners to trace overseas nodes. The trail faded into an Eastern European proxy, and then re-emerged with a surprising domestic tie. A small tech incubator registered under a different name, but run by a man who'd previously held a seemingly innocuous role in a nonprofit. It was the sort of obfuscation criminals love, hide ugly deeds behind respectable facades. I remember the day Agent Powell showed me a photo of the man. He was neat, with precise hair and a kind face, someone you'd trust at a PDA meeting. The cognitive dissonance made my stomach drop. He was not the caricature of a villain, he was the comfortable mask. Powell said, "He's a person of interest. We're coordinating subpoenas for his finances." Finding a respectable face linked to a fraud machine felt like unmasking a phantom. If he'd been involved, it explained how the scam gained trust so quickly. Then came an unexpected twist. Elise took a plea deal to cooperate against the incubator man, whose name, August Reed, surfaced like a stone in a still pond. He'd been careful, but his digital footprint connected payments to shell accounts. Reed claimed ignorance, but the evidence assembled by Lila and the feds was tightening like a vice. The narrative gained momentum. This was not a lone scammer but a structured operation. The hearing where Elise testified felt unreal. She described, in measured tones, how she'd been recruited with promises of steady logistical work, and how small payments led to larger responsibilities. She pointed to bank statements showing transfers she'd facilitated. The courtroom held its breath. Reed's lawyer argued plausible deniability. Reed maintained he was a legitimate entrepreneur whose accounts were compromised. But Elise's testimony tied him to decisions and contacts. After the hearing, reporters crowded the hall, flashing lights and hungry questions. Reed looked composed as he stepped into a car. "I felt a cold wash. Public exposure was messy, and the press loved a face to blame. Yet legal work is slow. The judge merely scheduled another hearing and required more documentation. The gavel fell, and we exited into a world suddenly more complicated. Politicians and stakeholders began to whisper about regulatory gaps, and banks tightened KYC processes, worried about liability. That night, an envelope arrived at my door with no return address. Inside was a photograph, me leaving the courthouse, and a single phrase, "Stop." My blood went cold. It was intimidation, a personal touch to a digital crime. Agent Powell increased security around my family, and Lila doubled down on outreach. The scam seemed to be trying to scare us into silence. But fear was now braided with resolve. I remembered Mateo's eyes in the hospital light and steadied myself. We would not bow. As the federal case gained traction, allied agencies across states coordinated freezes on accounts linked to Reed's network. Lila helped interpret financial flows, showing how shell payments rippled like concentric circles. Each freeze caused a ripple of confusion among clients who had become unwitting conduits. Businesses shuttered suddenly, employees puzzled by vanished deposits. The scandal grew into a cautionary tale about corporate oversight. Meanwhile, Reed began to fray. An innocuous email from a business partner exposed a misstep. He'd wired funds to an account with a name on our shell list. It was a sloppy string in a tapestry of deception. Reed's lawyer sought delays and motions, but the pattern of payments and witness testimony mounted. Public trust eroded. We reached a critical moment when a judge allowed a limited disclosure of some subpoenaed data to the victim's network. The documents showed internal memos and an accounting ledger listing coded payouts. I read my brother's name scribbled in one line, an invoice flagged for payout. It felt like a blade and a vindication together. Mateo squeezed my hand that night and said quietly, "You did this." I wanted to show him I was still the sister who fixed radios as a kid, but inside I was a storm. The prosecution pushed for a plea deal with Reed, an offer that would include restitution and a public apology, but only a fraction of full accountability. Lila argued for maximum exposure and prosecution, while some victims wanted swift restitution to recover funds. The debate tore at our group. What did justice look like? For me, it was more than money. I wanted a public accounting, legal precedent to stop this from repeating. But patience cost those who needed immediate help. We wrestled with compromise and principle. In a meeting that felt raw, Reed's lawyer presented evidence of financial stress and claimed Reed had been duped by partners. The prosecution countered with ledgers, witness testimony, and the courier logs. The judge, pragmatic, pushed for a mediated restitution plan while allowing criminal charges to proceed. The decision split our community. Some felt pragmatic relief. Others saw an incomplete victory. I walked home that night feeling the weight of compromise. Mateo's recovery was progressing, and the hospital had begun to return flagged funds from insurance that covered part of the cost. It wasn't everything, but it softened the edges. I understood why some accepted partial settlement. Still, I clung to one thing. The story now belonged to public record. That record could teach others how to fight. The trial began in October. The city felt charged, leaves falling like confetti. Reed's defense painted him as a philanthropist misunderstood, his team presenting glossy reports and testimonials. The prosecution introduced transaction flows, courier receipts, and digital trails that connected Reed's incubator to shell operations. Elise and the mule testified with credibility that stunned the courtroom. Each piece of evidence framed a larger truth: deception can be engineered by people who look ordinary. Cross-examination was brutal. Reed's lawyer tried to portray our group as vengeful, impulsive victims. But the prosecuting attorney pivoted masterfully, showing timelines and banking entries in a way even non-tech people could follow. I watched from the gallery, heart racing as culprit after culprit emerged from a tangle of documentation. The judge listened, unblinking. Midway, a surprise twist. A whistleblower from within Reed's incubator came forward with encrypted emails revealing deliberate obfuscation strategies. The whistleblower, a junior accountant, handed over documents that confirmed certain payout ratios. The defense's arguments collapsed like old scaffolding. The gallery buzzed. The case had grown beyond our small circle into a demonstration of corporate complicity. The closing arguments were quiet and heavy. The prosecutor's voice packed a steady indignation. Reed's lawyer offered sympathetic tones. Outside, our friends and other victims clustered, holding one another like survivors. I felt exhausted and oddly detached. My life had been remade by this campaign. When the jury left to deliberate, time slowed. Minutes felt like hours. I clutched a small prayer in my pocket, a typed note my mother had written that morning. Faith and fight. They returned with a verdict, guilty on multiple counts of fraud and money laundering. I didn't scream. I breathed a long, sinking breath. Reed's face, previously composed, crumpled. The courtroom murmured. A judge scheduled sentencing, but allowed for restitution hearings. The legal machinery had turned. Accountability was real, though imperfect. I felt vindicated, but also wary. Legal wins can be partial. The system moves slowly toward repair. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Agent Powell kept things measured, warning against gloating. He reminded us this victory was part of a longer battle against such schemes. Still, as I left the steps, the sun on my face felt like permission to exhale. My body trembled with relief and fatigue. For the first time in months, I allowed myself a small smile. Sentencing brought a tangible tally: fines, mandated restitution schedules, and the shuttering of Reed's incubator. Reed received prison time and a restitution order that, while not covering all losses, recognized the gravity of the crimes. The court also mandated public reporting and an oversight committee to audit transfers linked to similar incubators statewide. It was not perfect justice, but it was a structure that would make future scams harder. After sentencing, regulators updated guidelines for escrow handling in healthcare settings, the very breach that had been exploited at the story start. Hospitals tightened verifications, and some banks instituted new checks for sudden escrow withdrawals. I testified at a legislative hearing about how scams weaponize urgency. My testimony felt raw, but it landed. Policymakers asked hard questions. Small changes rippled out. We celebrated quietly. The Victims Network set up a fund to help families caught in similar traps and invested in community education. Lila launched a toolkit teaching people how to verify escrow accounts. In a modest ceremony, the hospital named a small recovery fund for victims of medical scams in honor of our campaign. It felt oddly intimate, a scar turned into form. After sentencing, life felt both fragile and clear, like glass that had been reshaped. The press cycle thinned, and our group dispersed into practical repairs, therapy appointments, bank meetings, tax reconciliations. Mateo's recovery continued. His laugh returned in fits, a sound that unmoored whatever tightness had lived in my chest for months. We rehung a crooked picture frame in the living room and ate store-bought cake to celebrate small things. The hospital's recovery fund paid a portion of his follow-up care, which eased a pressure I hadn't realized sat over us until it lifted. One morning, Agent Powell called with a new, formal update. The FBI had opened a parallel probe into the overseas nodes they traced through Reed's network. Apparently, the incubator's financial conduits had funneled money to a laundering cell that the FBI had been tracking for other crimes. Their involvement validated the scale we'd uncovered. I felt a mix of relief and unease. Bigger agencies meant more resources, and potentially more exposure for victims. I met Lila for coffee and we talked in practical, gentle tones. She was already drafting proposals for community workshops, partnering with the hospital to roll out an online verification tool. "You started something," she said, stirring her coffee. I wanted to say I was tired and proud in equal measure. The road ahead was long, but we had built a map others could follow. For the first time in months, I could imagine a future where urgency did not equal vulnerability. The FBI's involvement brought indictment papers across state lines. Months later, a coordinated set of raids landed on safe houses and shell company offices in 3 states. I watched footage on the evening news, agents moving with quiet violence through rooms filled with laptops, false business cards, and packing materials, evidence of a machine finally being dismantled. The lead agent contacted Agent Powell to coordinate witness interviews. They wanted me to identify documents and testify about the personal impact of the scam. Standing again in a government building felt familiar and oddly less terrifying. We had rehearsed this grief into a weapon. At the final federal hearing, a representative from the FBI read lists of charges against the laundering cell's ringleaders: wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy spanning continents. The courtroom felt immense and resolute. The ringleaders, faceless in grainy surveillance images, had built a centuries-old brand of exploitation dressed in modern code. As the verdicts read out, I felt justice extend beyond our small losses into a broader reprieve for future victims. We had moved the needle not only for ourselves but for many who would otherwise remain prey. When it was over, the hospital's head of patient advocacy hugged me in public. No cameras, only quiet thanks. Mateo squeezed my hand and said, "You did more than win money back. You stopped people." I had no theatrics left. There was only a soft, fierce contentment that came from changing a story's ending. Months later, life settled into a new rhythm. I returned to small domesticities, grocery lists, physical therapy appointments, late-night coffee. The Victims Fund grew into a nonprofit that offered emergency microgrants and verification training. Lila led workshops that filled community centers. Agent Powell occasionally spoke at panels about procedural changes. We kept the private group alive as a support forum. People shared updates and warnings. Our names, once splashed in headlines, softened into the background of an ongoing conversation about trust and technology. One quiet afternoon, Mateo and I walked by the river. He tossed pebbles into the current, watching them sink and disappear. "Do you ever think about going back to how things were?" he asked. I looked at him, grateful for his steady presence. "Not really," I said. "What happened changed us, but it also gave us something else: knowledge, a voice, and a clear line between fear and action." He nodded, and for a moment we were just 2 people enjoying a sunny, ordinary afternoon. At night, I sometimes open the file labeled "Begin" and read the first notes I jotted in panic. The paper no longer trembles me. It reminds me of the first furious, frightened decision to not be passive. We had been wronged, yes, but we fought, and in doing so, we made a map for others. When I close the file, I think of the FBI agents moving through dark rooms, of Lila's steady work, of strangers who pooled their pennies to hire a PI. The scammer had thought they won. Then the law, and a ragtag band of determined people, showed up, and we kept showing up until the balance tipped. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel and tap the bell to get notified the moment we drop a new story, and don't forget to like the video to help others find it.